Hello, global gardeners. Great to see you here on a Monday. Nice to see so many people checking in from everywhere. And we've got another 90 minutes filled with some good gardening information, things that I'll throw at you, questions I'll be answering, and then the opportunity for all of us just to share our time together as you ask and answer questions back and forth, as so often. Great to see our wonderful moderators here and a lot of the regulars checking in as well. Good morning to those of you that it's morning, and good evening to those of you that are on the other side of the ocean and you're watching as the night begins to fall. So always good to see you here on a Monday. Let's go ahead and jump into a question that John Jude had. Starting seeds for the first time, tomatoes, lost about 80% of them. I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully you learned some good lessons, but wondering if the ones that remain are worth keeping. And this is a good question because I think many of us have encountered this at one time or another, including me almost every year. You'll start seeds indoors with the intent of transplanting out your seedlings, and then something happens. The seedlings die and you're not able to put them all out, or as often is the case with me, I start way too many seeds, so I have more seedlings than I've got space for. Or, like has also happened to me in recent weeks, the weather is so bad at transplanting time that you can't get the plants out, and then they start becoming root bound and overgrown. So at what point do you decide that that's enough and you're going to put an end to it? And if you're growing the seedlings and they're struggling and they're not quite big enough to put out in your garden yet, but it's time, well, you might consider going to the nursery and just buying some plants that are all ready to go and put those in your garden and go ahead and chalk it up to experience. If the plants are past the point that they'll transplant well, you can still try transplanting them, but they might not do as well. It might be time to get some other plants and put them down in, or put them into the ground instead. Or it might be time just to decide that this isn't going to be the year to grow whatever that particular plant is. Make notes of all the things that didn't go right and hopefully correct them next year. So it's completely a personal experience for you, and your decision is yours to make as to whether you're going to go ahead and put in the ground those small or suffering plants, and then you're going to spend the whole season dealing with plants that maybe weren't ready to go in the ground, or just suck it up and let the plants that someone else grew take that place that you had set aside in your garden. It's tough. I really hate taking the plants that I've been growing and struggling with and then end up tossing them in the compost pile because they're just not ready. But sometimes that's what has to happen. So I'm not sure if that's the answer you were looking for, but that's one of those things that you just have to kind of figure out for yourself what's going to work best for you. So I would suggest the remaining 20% of the seedlings you have, continue growing them, whether they go outside or not. It's a learning experience when you're growing under lights for the first time. There's a lot to learn, even if those plants never make it outside. Okay, let's see what it is. I'm going to hold off on your question right now, Kay Russell. I'll get to the background here a little bit later once we have some more people checking on. So I like the background today. It's going to be nice. I've got a good story to share with you about that. And let's see, Brandy was wondering about possible herbicide contamination in soil. And I agree with Jay. If you suspect that the soil you're using is contaminated, and I had a video on this just a couple weeks ago about possible herbicide contamination in your garden, there isn't a test that I'm aware of that you can just go to the store and buy and run that test to see if you've got herbicides in your soil. Instead, what you've got to do is grow some plants. And so Jay suggested peas. I think lettuce is a great crop to try. The idea is to put seeds in what you suspect is a contaminated soil and see how they do. Do they germinate? Do they grow? If they grow, is there something wrong with the plant? And one of the things to look for, as Jay pointed out in that answer, is that the leaves will often curl, and it's a pretty dramatic curling. And it may actually reach the point where the leaves are so curled into almost like a little ball that they never open completely. That's a sign of herbicide damage. Even if you don't suspect you have damage, and you notice, particularly around the edges of your beds, if some of the plants have a dramatic leaf curl, it's possible that there's herbicide contamination. And I've seen this in a lot of situations where a gardener would ask this question of me. The center of the bed, the plants are growing fine, but the edges have all of these severely deformed leaves. And it can be as simple as your neighbor is spraying an herbicide, it wafts over on the breeze and lands on some of those plants around the periphery of your garden, and that little bit of airborne herbicide can be enough to have an effect on your plants. So the soil is maybe more likely if you don't know the source, or if you suspect the source came from a contaminated area. Just put some seeds in, grow some plants. If everything looks great, then you can assume at that point that the soil is not contaminated. I wish there was a soil kit to buy, but there really isn't something I can suggest for that. So anyway, I hope that helps out a little bit. Let's see. Kevin is saying, waiting on tomatoes to start ripening. Have a ton of mountain vineyard and atomic grapes on the vine. Lots of others ready to fray up but not ripening yet. How can I make them ripen faster? And so that's an interesting question. And for the most part, the plants that we're growing are going to grow at their own rate, and then the fruit is going to ripen when it's ready to ripen. Now, tomatoes can benefit from extra sunlight to improve the ripening of the fruit. So if you notice that you're getting a lot of fruit that's not ripening, and that fruit is being sheltered by the leaves, it's basically growing in the shade, well, then you can prune off some of those branches and some of those leaves to expose some of that fruit to a little more sunlight. That can accelerate the ripening a little bit, but you have to be careful because tomatoes can also get sun scald. They'll get sunburn on their plants. It's kind of a yellowish, whitish color on the outside, and so too much sun can actually result in a discoloration of the fruit. But just improving the access to the sunlight is one of the best ways to do that. And thank you for that super sticker, Chris. I'm so glad that you did that. I hope you can increase some of the sunlight on your tomatoes and get some ripening. Okay, good morning to all the people that are checking in. Always nice to see Jay Dixon here, and always nice to see Heidi Clark here, our moderators, because they're going to be helping you out as we proceed through the time we have together today. And Laura Full is always here. Laura Full has a lot of good information to share, and actually raised an important point that I thought go ahead and spend a little bit of time talking about. You may have seen in the United States that they released the drought monitor maps in the last week, and it doesn't look good for the western United States. Some of the worst drought conditions on record, some areas that are suffering from decades of drought. And so Laura was wondering about my thoughts, at least, on the current drought situation and how that might affect your planning for the garden. And if you saw my video tour of the garden that I just did a few days ago, I mentioned one of the areas that I have in my garden that is specifically designed for drought conditions. Xeric, or xeriscaping, is a concept that was actually developed at the Denver Botanic Gardens just up the road from me. And the idea is to identify the plants that don't require a lot of water, and you match them with your landscape, and that way you can save water. You don't have to grow all the traditional garden plants that require a lot of water. You can choose plants that require less water. So right off the bat, one of the methods is with the planning and the plant selection. And then one of the xeric principles is really making sure you match the plant to the location. And you group your plants. So you put together those plants that have the same watering needs. So in my lower section of my front yard, I have plants like yarrow and salvia and gaillardia, plants that all require about the same amount of water, which isn't much. In the first couple years, whenever you take this approach where you're putting in xeric plants, plants that don't require a lot of water, you still need to water them. These are perennial plants or bushes, even trees. They need water to get established in the first couple years. After they're established, they will require less water from that point forward. But you still need to treat them like any other plant. Even in your vegetable garden, you can take this same basic approach where you choose the plants that require less water as compared to something that requires a lot more. So for instance, melons. The fruit of a melon is mostly water, and it requires a lot of water to grow and a lot of water to develop the fruit. If you're gardening in an area that is about to be or already impacted by drought, I would suggest you don't grow melons. You can buy melons at the market relatively inexpensively, and you don't need to waste the space or your water to grow those kind of plants. Instead, you can grow plants like corn, for instance. Corn is a relatively heavy feeder, but it doesn't require as much water. Here in the United States, there are acres and miles of corn that are not irrigated. They survive on the natural rainfall. So by selecting the type of plants you have in your landscape and in your vegetable garden, you can really reduce the amount of water that you're using. And then you can look at the actual soil composition and what type of beds you use. And there's a number of different systems out there. I haven't made any videos on it yet, but you can check out some videos on self-watering beds and the type of containers that actually have reservoirs in the bottom so that you water periodically, and then the roots are taking their moisture out of that reservoir. That's definitely an option. One of the best things you can do, however, is just add organic matter to your soil. When you have compost and lots of other organic matter, it acts like little sponges. So when it does rain or when you do water, that moisture is held within the soil by all of that organic matter that you have in the soil. And so that's the approach I take in my dry region, is to try to have as much organic matter in the soil as possible. Or like if you saw my video where I was filling the beds and I used a lot of branches and logs in the bottom, same basic idea. It's just a different type of organic matter, where at the bottom of my raised beds, I've got these huge sponges of decaying wood. They soak up the water and then they help keep the soil around all of those decaying wet logs nice and moist for the plants the roots to grow into. So I think it's definitely something you should think about if you're in an environment that is challenging as far as rainfall and water is concerned, and start learning about some of these different ways to garden. Mulch is critical. I mulch everything because if I don't mulch, my soil will dry out in a single day because of low humidity and high heat that I have in the summer. So I have to mulch all of my beds to keep the soil from evaporating, which is another concern in a drought area. So I'm glad you asked about that, Laura Fall. I think it's something that all of us should be aware of. Even if you live in a region with a lot of natural rainfall, I think it's something you should be aware of because the basic concepts still hold true. Selecting the right kind of plant for your particular climate, but also amending your soil and using mulch. Even in wet areas, those are good practices. They just tend to be a little more important for areas that are encountering drought conditions. So, Mark B., welcome to the Gardener Scott community as a garden support member. Thanks for doing that. Appreciate you coming on board. Isabel, thank you for that super chat. You're the best. You really go deep into any topics. My garden is successful because of you. Well, thank you, Isabel. I'll throw it back at you. I'm just giving you some information. Your garden is successful because of you. A good garden grows where a good gardener goes. And so you can use the information that I'm offering, but don't discount your success based on your own actions. So I think you're doing a great job if you're having that success. Chris, thank you again for that contribution. Maybe thinking rain barrel and ration time. Yeah, good point about the rain barrels. Now, it's interesting. I've mentioned this a few times in the past, but you have to look at the laws within your particular state. Here in Colorado, up until about 4 years ago, it was illegal to put rain barrels by your house and collect rainwater. Because of all of the water laws in the western United States, every raindrop that falls in the state of Colorado has already been spoken for, often by someone who lives in Arizona, Nevada, or California. And so it was illegal in Colorado for us to collect the rainwater off of our roofs. And I know that may sound crazy, but that's what the law was. The law was changed a few years ago, so now we can have 2 rain barrels, and that's it. We still can't collect a big cistern of water. So depending on your laws and the rules in maybe your HOA, I would definitely say do a rain barrel if you have that option. But do be aware that for many of us that wasn't an option, and even now we're severely limited in what we can do about collecting the rainwater in some of these areas where we don't get that much rain to start with. Yankee Sister, good to see you back again. Grands are picking lettuce and sugar peas for lunch last week of virtual school. Good for you. I know you've been working hard on that. It's always good to get the grandkids out in the garden and picking. So that's awesome. I'm glad to see you here today, and glad that you're taking advantage of that. So let's see what else we have. Johnny Castile saying, yes, you have to also think of all the hazardous materials on your asphalt shingled roof, also the birds pooping on your roof and the bacteria and insects. And you're exactly right. So I do not have rain barrels for that exact reason. Now, rainwater is fantastic, but my roof is an older roof, and that's exactly one of my concerns is the decaying material that I've got on top of my roof running into the couple rain barrels that I could have, in addition to all the bird poop and the potential E. coli contamination. And then if I use that water in my vegetable garden, there's just no telling what impact it's going to have on my plants. Now, I am planning at some point to do a rain barrel off of my garage, because that area is my area for my perennial flowers. It's going to be my pollinator garden, so I'm not as concerned about using rainwater that's coming off of that roof. But yes, I completely agree with you on that point. That is something to think about when you collect rainwater, where that rain is coming from that you're collecting, and then how you're planning to use it. So thanks for pointing that out. Taco Promotions, good day to you. God bless you and your support. I'm curious, in duck housing, is there something to assist from soil clumping? And so I haven't raised ducks. I know some people that have ducks. I did do chickens, and wood shavings is what I found best. So with my chickens, I found that wood shavings worked better than straw. And I'm not sure if Kiri's on today, but if she's on or if she checks on, she's got chickens, and she tends to use straw or nothing, and she has a lot of clumping. So when I get the droppings from her, it's pretty clumpy. But wood shavings is what I've found to be most effective to avoid the clumping. And for any of the rest of you that have chickens or ducks, if there's something that you use, by all means, throw it out in the comments so we can all share that information. Okay, let's see. Laura Fry, thank you for that super chat. Thank you so much. Some of my first year strawberries from bare root crowns have yellow leaves. Not sure if it's overwatering or nitrogen deficiency. How can, excuse me, how can I tell? You can get quick tests to get an idea of the nitrogen levels within your soil. That's one thing. If you know your soil is deficient in nitrogen, it's possibly a nitrogen deficiency. But look at all the leaves. If all of the leaves are yellowing, or if just the lower leaves are yellowing, then it's possibly a couple different things. So a watering issue, most likely the lower leaves are going to be the ones that yellow first, and the new growth is going to be nice and green. If the whole plant looks yellow, and if all of the leaves begin to have a discoloration, or you start to see the veins within the leaves, then it's probably a nutrient issue. And so stand back a little bit and take a look at the whole plant. Not unusual for plants like strawberries, for instance, in the spring, depending on rain or no rain, for the soil to get a bit of an imbalance with the moisture level. And until that levels out, you may have some yellowing of leaves throughout the garden. And I've seen this in a number of my plants. But the nitrogen deficiencies will be more throughout the whole plant rather than just a few select leaves. So hope that helps out. I did see a question Frank was asking about water contamination. Do I worry about the hoses? I don't worry about the hoses. Hoses are one of those things that you have to use hoses in your garden. And so I buy the hoses that are specifically made for gardening. Now you can buy the heavy duty industrial hoses, and I do not use those for the garden. They're often made with a different type of rubber, and they're made for commercial situations. And so I admit I do give a little bit of trust to the manufacturers. And if they tell me that it's a hose, and I do look, because you'll often see on the hose package, it will say, do not drink the water. And those are the kind of hoses I try to stay away from. And it often takes a little bit of searching, but you can find hoses where it'll tell you that it is safe for drinking. And so if I see a hose and there's a warning on the label that says don't drink from the hose, well, then I'm less likely to want to use that kind of hose in my garden. So a garden safe hose is often good enough, but sometimes we don't have those options when it comes to what we have availability to in our gardens. But do read the label or the packaging on hoses, because you might be surprised at some of the things that are printed on there. So thanks for asking that. Let's see what else we have. Lily saying turn up the volume. I'll move a little bit closer to the microphone, so hopefully that'll work out a little bit better. We'll see if that's good. Growing with Jay says my onion tops are curling like snakes. Any advice? I can't find anything on the internet. It's possibly herbicide contamination. I'm not sure of something that causes the onion tops to curl. It could be, take a good look at it. It could be that it might be starting to bolt. So if you've had some really hot temperatures, that could be causing the tips of your onions to start curling. But other than those couple things, I'm not really positive. So if someone else knows about curling onions, go ahead and throw that out there as well. Let's talk a little bit more about watering, since that's come up and that's one of the topics of the day. Kevin earlier was asking about watering tomatoes, and that he has blossom end rot for the first time, and wondering about that. And so that's a really good correlation to draw. So blossom end rot on tomatoes is caused by a calcium deficiency. And so you'll see a lot of advice out there that says you should add eggshells to your tomatoes when you plant. You should use all kinds of calcium supplements to avoid blossom end rot. But Most of our soils have plenty of calcium in them. And so really you shouldn't be thinking right off the bat that you need to add calcium if you have blossom end rot. Instead, as Kevin suspects, it's a watering issue. Because if you have too much water in the soil, well, then the plant can't absorb that calcium. And if there's not enough water in the soil, then the plant can't absorb that calcium. And so the key with tomatoes throughout the entire life cycle is to try to keep as consistent a moisture level as possible. Avoid drowning the plants with a lot of water so that they're resting in really muddy soil, and avoid allowing the soil to dry out completely. If you could stay within those ends of the spectrum and just keep your soil evenly moist like a wrung out sponge, you're less likely to have blossom end rot. And use it also as a sign for your watering. If you see a tomato with blossom end rot, well, then reevaluate your watering practices and actually get into the soil, dig it up a little bit, because you may find out, and I've had this issue before, back to the idea of mulching and organic matter and drought conditions. I've had situations, I tell you to take your finger and stick it in the soil to see what the moisture level is. Well, that only works for about the top 3 inches, however long your finger is. And I had blossom end rot a few years back and was sure the soil moisture was good. But once I dug down, I realized that the moisture level was great in about the top 4 inches. But once I got down to about the 6 to 8 inch point, the soil was dry. I was watering too shallow over a period of time. Basically, every day I was watering, and I was keeping the top of the soil nice and moist, but I wasn't allowing enough water to drain down to where the roots were. And that can be a big issue with tomatoes because they can be pretty deep rooted. So do water well, allowing for time for that water to drain to those lower levels, but just don't water a lot every single day, or a lot so often that you're saturating those lower levels. So it is one of those things that comes with experience. You just got to do it. You got to stick your finger in the soil. Occasionally you have to dig a deeper hole near your plants that's more than just 4 inches, and keep watching the fruit, because the fruit will tell you if it's getting too much or too little. But the first indications, like we were just talking about a few minutes ago, is often the leaves. If you see the leaves start to yellow, stop. Think about the watering aspect and whether that's the reason your leaves are yellowing, because those lower leaves are going to be the first ones to show indication of a watering problem. So hope that helps out, Kevin. It's one of those things with all plants, not just tomatoes. You've got to keep the soil as moist as possible consistently, and you'll have better success with your plants. So we'll see how that turns out, if that modifies anything you're doing. So, okay. Hi, Karen, southwest of Thunder Bay. I've been struggling with my brassicas for 3 years now. Depending on which brassicas you're trying to grow, I'm sorry to hear that. Brassicas can be tough. Now, I know Thunder Bay can be a challenging region, and there's a lot of brassicas that I don't grow because my spring is just so short. And I'll talk about this at the end today. But I had a week of spring this year. We went from winter to summer in the period of just over a week. And that's not good for brassicas, because brassicas typically like a longer, cooler period. And so for me, in my garden, it is so cold so late and then becomes so hot so early that just doesn't give enough time for many of the brassicas to get established and to grow well before they're suddenly exposed to the conditions that they're going to start bolting. So take a look at your weather patterns and see if maybe that's why you've been having some issues with the brassicas, as far as when you're planting in spring as to the end of your winter, or whether you even have much of an end of the winter, and when your summer starts, because that's been a big issue for me And I just don't grow as many brassicas as I would like to, because not all of them do as well. I do have some broccoli in my garden right now, but the same type of thing. I wanted to grow broccoli from seed to see how well it would do. I started it about a month and a half ago, and then we had an extremely cold day, so cold that it killed all of my plants that I had started a month and a half ago. Some of it is starting to come back, but now the temperatures are getting so hot that I doubt I'll have really any success at all with the broccoli. And so it was kind of a little experiment, because I haven't had much success with broccolis in the past for the same reasons. And you just have to evaluate your own garden to see whether it's working or not. Thanks, Chris, for that contribution. Better to underwater than overwater. Yes, and that's often the case. And so one of the reasons why you should really try to avoid overwatering is you have to think about the structure of soil. And so think of soil like Swiss cheese. It has a whole bunch of air pockets in it. And the roots of your plants need those air pockets. The plants need oxygen in the soil to grow. If you overwater, well, all those little holes in the soil, all those pockets that used to be filled with air are now filled with water. And the plant still needs oxygen in the soil. But if all those places that used to be oxygen are now filled with water, you can drown your plant, literally drown your plant, because it's not getting the oxygen it needs. And so that's the big issue with overwatering. Underwatering, the plant is going to slow down. It's going to realize it doesn't have enough water to grow, and so it's going to slow down its growth, and it's going to sacrifice some of the leaves, like those lower leaves. And plants can bounce back from underwatering pretty quickly, but they may not bounce back as well from an overwatering condition that actually kills some of the cells and can seriously impact a plant. So good point. Definitely something to think about in that respect. So let's see. Summit Mail saying, any advice on getting rid of the invasive weed called creeping bellflower? I've tried pulling, digging down 2 feet to get the tuber, and also spraying. Nothing is working. So I'm not familiar with creeping bellflower specifically, though I do have some pernicious weeds like that. And it's one of those things that it takes time and it takes effort. And it takes a combination of all those things that you're talking about. And so depending on how bad it is, you may need to spray an herbicide to try to kill the plant. But often with those deep tuberous weeds, you're not going to actually kill the plant. You're just going to kill the leaves. Now it's going to send up new growth to replace those leaves. And you've got to be right on top of it. As soon as those new leaves emerge, pull them. And it's going to keep sending out more, and you got to pull them. What you're looking to do is to weaken the roots of the plant to the point that the plant's going to die. And often this will take years to happen. If you get an infestation of one of these deep-rooted tuberous weeds, there's a lot of energy in those roots, and it's going to try to spread. It's going to try to send up new plants, and it's going to do that until it's depleted all of its energy. And it's a lot of work. Digging up may work, but there's a lot of these weeds that when you attempt to dig them up, just by breaking apart the roots, all those little root segments can reroot. And now you might actually exacerbate the problem because you've got more of the plants that are growing. And so it's a tough balance, but you just got to stay on top of it until all of the energy of the root has been used trying to grow new plants. And when all that energy is gone, then the plant is dead. And I've had some weeds like that in the past. That it took 3 or 4 years to get rid of. At the Galileo School Garden, I had a bed that got contaminated with bindweed one year, and and it took almost 3 years. A raised bed, and you would think it would be relatively easy to control in a raised bed, but it wasn't. And so I didn't grow anything else in that bed for 2 years, so that every time the bindweed started appearing on the surface, I dug down and I pulled it out. And it took that long to control it. But it was worth it because I didn't want it spreading to any of the other beds. And it's a pain, but that's kind of the only thing you can do. Now you can do something like get chickens. Depending on the weed, a lot of those weeds are very tasty for chickens. And I know gardeners that have done that, where they've fenced an area with weeds like that, and then they put chickens in that area, and they let chickens do the weeding and the plucking out of all those kind of plants. And that can save you some effort. And in the process, the chickens will loosen the soil and also fertilize the soil with their poop. So there's an option if you've got chickens or want to get chickens. Use them in the area where you've got the weeds, and that might also help and relieve some of your concerns. So it's a battle. It's definitely a battle. Heidi says, I'm battling a milkweed that transplanted to a pot, and now the sprouts are springing up all around that area. I keep pinching the growth off, and it keeps coming. Milkweed is another one of those that you just got to stay on top of it. And same kind of thing. Got to keep pinching off, and then eventually, hopefully, you'll be done with it. So, Teresa, thanks. Yeah, this is, you may have noticed, I'll talk a little bit about this at the end as well. This is the first time that I haven't worn flannel in months, because this is really the first week that we've had consistently warm temperatures all week, and we're actually getting into hot temperatures. So it's actually an Arizona souvenir t-shirt. I know there's a few of you from Arizona, so thanks for commenting on that shirt, because I was looking forward to not having to put on flannel. This room where I filmed this has a nice big window off to the side here, and in the winter it gets pretty cold, and in the summer it gets pretty hot in this room. So I wear what's appropriate to try to stay comfortable. Okay, let's see. Ramon RB says, seeing lots of aphids in the garden, bumblebees also, really like the honeydew produced. Should I just do nothing and wait for the beneficial insects? And so good question. I'm glad you asked that, because this is actually on my list. One of the things I wanted to talk about today in talking about weeds. And so there's two aspects of weeds. One that we were just talking about. You have the weeds that you want to try to get rid of. And then there's the weeds that you might want to keep and not get rid of. And the reason I say this is specifically for the beneficial insects. Now, it depends on the plant. With bindweed or thistle or any of the others that we've just been talking about, I try to get rid of those as soon as I see them emerge. But basically, a weed is just the wrong plant in the wrong location. It's not necessarily something invasive. It's not necessarily something harmful. And so this week, for the first time, I saw the very first ladybug in my garden. And where was the ladybug? It was on the weeds in the outskirts of my raised beds. And so it's one of those things that I haven't spent a lot of time dealing with the few pests that I have, like aphids, and I've talked about this before as well, is I allow some of the aphids on my plants so that when the ladybugs show up, there's food to eat. And so to answer your question, I would suggest some control over the aphids. Try to spray them off with a garden hose, or get in there and shake the leaves and crunch them with your fingers. But by allowing your flowers to grow and your grasses to grow and some of the weeds around the edges of your garden, that is what will often attract the ladybugs and the lacewings and a lot of those beneficial predatory insects. And there is a time delay from when the aphids show up until when the beneficial insects show up. And so my suggestion is to allow for that, have a little bit of patience, and those beneficial insects should show up. Now, if your plants are really suffering, if you have such a heavy aphid infestation that the plants are getting serious damage, then yes, definitely deal with that problem. And hopefully when the good bugs show up, there'll still be enough aphids to eat. But it doesn't take a lot of work to deal with a infestation as soon as you see it. So as soon as you see aphids or any other type of pest appear on your plants, if you can deal with them early, soon, right away when you see them appear, they're less likely to explode into a major infestation. And if you see the good bugs showing up, that's another clue that you are in balance in your garden, and you can sit back a little bit. I'll still, if I see a big aphid infestation after I know the ladybugs have shown up, I'll still go ahead and spray off the aphids, but I'm not adding any chemicals or doing anything major to try to control those pests at that point, because I want more and more of those predatory insects to come to the garden. So Chris is asking, does bamboo grow in zone 7 and higher? It depends on the variety. So I was actually looking at growing a bamboo. It's Arrow, what's the name of it? Arrow stock bamboo or something like that. That is supposed to be good to like zone 6. And I think that was the only one that I found that was zone 6. I did, when I was looking into it, find a number that were good for zone 7. So it all depends on the variety. Like most plants, you can find plants that are suitable for your particular zone. I do know that there are bamboos that can do zone 7, and definitely there's bamboos for 8 and 9 and 10, which gets much closer to what they naturally, most bamboos naturally like. So do a little search looking for some specific varieties, and you might find something that you can use that you'll like to do. Lucid Farms, thank you for that super chat contribution. Meat Rabbit's manure is gold for a cold garden compost. Do you recommend cluster sowing beets, and are there crops that like being cluster sowed? Good questions. And so I've got actually a video that I'm in the works making right now that's going to be talking about the cold garden composting. And so look for that. So using manures like rabbit manure is a great way to go ahead and get that going, to use that organic material in the garden without having to do a hot compost. But as far as the beet clustering, I experimented a little bit last year with some beet clustering. And so if you don't know, the seed that we put in the ground for beets and for Swiss chard is actually the fruit of that plant. And so because it's a fruit, it has multiple seeds in it. And so when you put a beet seed or a Swiss chard seed, you will probably get 3, 4, 5, sometimes more plants grow from that single seed. If you allow them all to grow, like beetroot for instance, they'll do fine, but you might have 5 beetroots all growing from that same spot that you put in a single seed. And so in the bed I was working in last year, I thinned out the beets that I put in so that I only had one plant growing every 3 to 4 inches apart. And then right next to it, I had another area where I didn't thin it out at all and allowed all of them to grow. And all the plants did extremely well. The big difference was in the size of the root, and this probably doesn't surprise you. And so when plants are growing close together, they are each competing for the nutrients of the soil. And you're going to get typically smaller plants and smaller roots. So when you grow beets in a cluster, you'll get more beetroots, but you'll get smaller beets. If you thin them out, you'll get much bigger beetroot, but you'll get fewer of them. And so I actually like the idea of growing beets in clusters because the young beets tend to be more tender. They may or may not be sweeter, but they're often easier to eat. And depending on how you're eating your beets, you may like a whole bunch of small beets rather than a few big beets. And so I think that's really the biggest determination when you're deciding whether you're going to grow beets in a cluster or not, is just how many you want and what size you want. And so particularly for pickling beets, I've done that before where I grow or I pickle a whole bunch of small, like golf ball size beets and put those in a jar. And those can be fun to slice into a salad, just those nice bite-sized slices. And so there's an option, and there's a reason for growing beets in a cluster, is just because you want a whole bunch of small beets. The plants are going to do fine either way. How much work do you want to do with thinning, and whether you want to change the outcome. Try 2 different methods and see what you like best. Okay, let's see what else we have. Thanks, Jay. Jay's always so good every week, giving the reminders of ways that you can support the channel, and I do appreciate you so much, Jay, to do that every week. It's always good to have all the people checking in from all different places, all the questions we have. I think that's also so wonderful, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate all of that. And thank you, Torches and Pitchforks, for that. And we'll put some music on at the end and listen to some good music about how can you have your pudding if you don't eat your beets. Those of you that know what I'm talking about will know what I'm talking about. Let's see. Bettina says, I cluster sow beets, take out small ones to eat right away, let the rest grow on. And that's a good point. I didn't mention that. That's really a great technique. And so what you can do with your clusters is essentially you're thinning out your plants. And so when you have 4 or 5 of those small beets growing, if you pull out some of the ones around the edges and you don't disturb the other roots, then those other roots will grow bigger. And so, yeah, take out those small ones, eat them right away, allow the ones that remain to grow bigger, and harvest them when they reach the size that you want. So great idea, great idea. Thanks for suggesting that. I think that's exactly the kind of thing that you want to look for. Linda Weatherly, we're in Florida and the heat is no joke. How can I help my plants through this intense heat? The heat is no joke in so many areas right now. I know there's many of you in the northern United States this last week been setting high temperature records for the north, for the northeast. I bought a big roll of shade cloth. It just arrived this last week, and I'm already setting up my hoops to lay shade cloth over it. And so there's a few things you can do. Shade cloth is key. I got 40% shade cloth because I've got such a short season. I want my plants to grow as well as possible and still get sun, but I've got to protect them from the intense sun that I often get. But you can get a 60, 70, 80% shade cloth, and that can make a big difference. Also, if you water in the morning, that will help your plants stay cool after a cool evening. The evaporation around those plants will also cool the air a little bit with shade cloth. That allows your plants to have a longer period of time in cooler morning conditions. And then if they're shaded in the afternoon, that often helps. Now, you've probably heard you're not supposed to water your plants in the afternoon, but I've done that as well. When it's really, really hot and I know my plants are going to suffer, it's the same basic idea. I'll mist some of my plants to moisten the plant and also the mulch to help cool the conditions around the plant as well on those really, really hot days. You can plan your plantings so that the tall plants are going to block the sun, so the plants behind those tall plants have more shade and cooler conditions. Grow a lot of plants, and what I mean by this is actually cover the entire bed with plants. Use a plant like a squash or a cucumber as a growing mulch, because if you can keep the soil cooler, the plant will also be less stressed. And so the air temperature might be really hot, and the plant may wilt perfectly normal. It should recover in the evening. But if you can keep the soil temperature below some of those extreme temperatures that it could reach without mulch, the plant will also do well. So definitely use a mulch like straw or leaves or wood chips, depending on what you're growing, and then grow a broad-leafed plant in that complete area to help keep the soil temperature down as well, because those broadleaf plants will shade the soil. So there's a couple ways to look at it. You shade your plant and you shade your soil. And if you take both of those approaches, you're more likely to reduce the stress on your plants in those situations. So I hope it cools down moving forward, but it doesn't look like it. This has just been crazy heat for a lot of us in a lot of areas right now. So let's see what else we have popping up. Johnson is saying, for the heat, I have sections that I purposely planted so they get afternoon shade. Peppers love the late day shade. Yeah, good point. And I pointed out in a video I did a few months ago about sun mapping your garden, and you do exactly that. And this is a really good time of year. As I mentioned in that video, I did that video in the winter, and so now in the summer, do the same thing. Go out in your garden and observe the areas of your garden during the entire day, especially during the afternoon. And you may find an area that receives afternoon shade. It gets morning sun, maybe it gets evening sun. But if you can grow something in an area that gets afternoon shade, that's another strategy to deal with some of these areas that all of us have with the extreme temperature variations. You might have to grow in pots, you might have to grow in containers, but that is definitely an option, is to grow in an area that is naturally shaded by a fence, by a building, by a tree, whatever it is you happen to have. So, Chris, thank you again for that contribution. They also sell paint sunscreen for plants. I've seen that. I've never used a paint sunscreen for my plants, so I really can't comment on that specifically. But if you have, let me know. That would be something new to me. Okay, and yeah, Kevin says, my tomato beds get late afternoon shade, maybe why they don't ripen as fast as I want. and that could be it. If you're growing those sun-loving plants, they do like to have a good full period of sun. And it's a trade-off, because if it gets too hot, if it gets above 90 degrees Fahrenheit or about 30 degrees Celsius, you start running the risk of low or no pollination, or the blossoms begin to fall off, and so you'll lose some fruit set when it starts getting that hot. But if the plants aren't getting enough sun, then they're also not going to be setting out the blossoms and growing as well. So it's another reason why you need to look at your whole garden and all of the impacts on your garden, to include the weather and the climate and the structures, but especially the sun and how it's impacting your plants. And so for you, Kevin, for instance, this year, note where you're growing those tomatoes. And I know you've got extra space. I saw the video you did with your garden. And so next year, try growing the tomatoes in a different spot, and then compare this year to last year and see if that afternoon shade makes a big enough difference for you to change where you put your plants in the future. And not just tomatoes, for everything else as well. Kay Russell's saying, my garden gets full sun all day, which is why I plant my tomatoes south of my peppers to help shade. There you go. Great strategy. Great strategy. Okay, let's go ahead and get to the backdrop journey of involution. Saying backdrop garden photo lovely, although slightly disappointed, not ours. We have a stone bird bath thing too, and I just today put rainbow colors of glass pebbles in it, making a sensory healing garden. That's awesome. Don't know if you were here on the live stream a week or two ago where I talked about a sensory garden. It's been one of the things that of all my gardening, I felt probably the best about creating a sensory garden, and then seeing the students go to the garden, and just how great that was. So good to hear that. So let's talk about the background today. This comes from Michael Harrington, and it's a few weeks old, but I wanted to highlight Michael's garden area. It's a very small garden. Michael's a new gardener, and the thing I love about this is Michael realized as a new gardener that he needs to grow vertically. And so a small space, you can see just this single bed off the deck, and then off to this area right here, specifically put in some flowers to attract pollinators, which I think is great. But if you look over in this area right here, you can actually see some trellises, some archwork that he's put into place. And right here, there's a metal pole across the top. And so the plants are still relatively small, but that metal pole across the top is in place to support the tomatoes in the bed that will be growing vertically, which is a great idea. And those the trellises on the other side are to support cucumbers to grow vertically, and pole beans to grow vertically. And so I think this is just awesome, especially for a new gardener, to recognize that growing vertically can allow you to grow a lot more in a given space. And just one bed can give you lots of options. He's got zucchini growing, he's got eggplant growing. So I think this is going to be a nice space, and I think it's going to be educational. I think, as he suspected, that there's probably too many plants in this bed, especially 3 zucchini plants. And so that's going to be an eye-opening experience as everything starts growing. But that's one of the great things about being a new gardener. When you try things if you've never tried before, and then you get to see what works and what you like. And so thanks to Michael for sharing this photo as my backdrop today. And for all of you, if you want me to include your photo as the backdrop for the week, send me a photo at gardenerscott@gardenerscott.com. Tell me a little bit about the garden, if you would. Specifically give me info, or give me approval to use your photo. And so, for instance, Michael had sent me the original picture a few weeks ago, actually a couple different pictures. I chose this one, and then had to send a secondary email to give me the approval so that I could use it. So just make sure that you tell me. I don't want to run into any copyright issues, and I want to make sure that you get the full credit for your picture if I'm going to use it as a backdrop. So if I don't have your permission, even if it's a great picture, I probably won't use it, or don't expect that I'll use it as a backdrop. But it is nice to see all of the photos that are starting to come in, and I'll be showing more in future weeks. And so, yeah, Kevin says, I like the way the arch carries the vines up to the porch. Very cool. And another thing about this, and I'm not sure if this was part of the plan or if it's just going to be accidentally discovered, but you can actually plan to grow vertically onto a deck, and assuming that this door right here is the door to the kitchen. And now imagine that you have all of the plants growing up the trellis. You don't even have to go off the deck to harvest. You can just come out the door, walk up to the edge railing, and start harvesting, then go back into the kitchen and enjoy what you harvested. So that's one of those planning things. I did that at a house years and years ago, where I had some things growing at the base of the deck, and by the end of the season I could just walk out and harvest beans, and actually did have some cucumbers so I could harvest right from the deck without having to go down the stairs and go into the garden itself. So nice thought for planning, if you can actually find the space that you can do that in. I think that's great. Okay, yeah, Journey Involution says what we plan to do, vertical and square foot. So great to see and learn as we are new too. Good ideas that you can carry forward, be mainly next year for us, and practice this year when we finally get plants in. So good to hear that. It's so nice. I know there's a lot of new gardeners that watch my videos and that come on to the live stream. And that's one reason why we do it, is to give you ideas that others are doing. And as you've probably heard me say many times, there's a lot of good ideas from all gardeners. You don't have to be an old, experienced gardener to have good ideas. There's a lot of good ideas that new gardeners come up with every day. So that's awesome. Yeah, Linda agrees. Archway's giving me great ideas for a future permanent garden. I ordered some grapevines. They're supposed to be delivered in a couple weeks. And I'm going to be adding a whole new archway area in my garden as well as a permanent place to start growing some grapes. And so arches are really a nice element. I've got the main archway in my garden that I have the raised beds for, but this new one will actually be an archway in the ground, and I'll be growing from the ground. So arches give you all kinds of options, from one bed to another bed, in the ground, as a trellis, up to a deck. It is one of those things that can really expand what you're doing with your gardens. Barbara says, peanuts in Iowa, transplanted last Friday, now have tiny black ants around, not on one of them. Will they hurt it? If they're black ants, they probably won't hurt the plants. A lot of the ants are instead, especially small ants, they're taking the decaying matter, like in your mulch or in your soil, back into the nests. Keep an eye on them. I'm not aware of too many small black ants that are going to be eating your plants. And so I wouldn't be too concerned by it. But with any new insect that you see in your garden, just keep observing it to see what it's doing and what impact it might have on your plants. And it might be, I haven't grown peanuts before, but it might be that your peanuts are secreting liquids, moisture through the leaves or through the stems. That's one of the things I've seen. My peonies are getting very close to blooming. And so the tip of the branches where the bloom emerges from, that starts secreting honeydew, basically. And so I'm noticing typically it starts with the wasps and then it turns into the ants. And so I see wasps and then ants appear on my peonies every year, and they're there just to eat the liquid that the plant is secreting. And so it's possible that the plants might be doing that, or it might be dew from the morning. If you have any type of humidity and cool morning air, it could be that kind of moisture that's on the plant that the ants are collecting. So look for it. Look to see what you can find in your particular insect and plant relationship, and maybe that'll give you some answers as well. And so I did want to talk a little bit about blooming today, since I was just talking about my peonies blooming. And right now my lilac video is doing extremely well because people are thinking about pruning their lilacs. My lilacs are in bloom, and I've got a couple more weeks of that. Some of you might have your lilacs that have already started to fade. I wanted to mention, as far as the blooming throughout the season, but think about and learn about your specific plants and the time of year that they bloom. And so many of the shrubs that are blooming plants that are spring bloomers, like lilacs, the time to prune those plants is shortly after they finish flowering. And so a lot of those spring blooming plants will set the buds for the following year's blooms right after they bloom this year. And so the lilacs are blooming for me now. In a couple weeks, they'll be fading. And a couple weeks after that, I'll prune off all those old blossoms. Then the buds will be set, and then next year they'll bud out again. If I prune my lilac bush in winter, like we've all been told we prune our trees in winter, and so many gardeners think they need to prune all of their plants in winter. Well, if you prune your spring blooming plants in winter, you might, in fact, you're probably likely to be cutting off the flower buds that formed the previous summer. So just keep that in mind, that if you've got some of those plants that you want to clean up in your garden right now, go ahead and think about pruning now rather than pruning in the winter. Holds true with the or a slightly different aspect of our spring flowering bulbs. For the tulips, for the daffodils, for the crocus, all those kind of plants that bloom in the spring, it's okay to cut down the flower stalk once those blooms have faded, but leave the plant in. Allow the plant to continue growing. I know many gardeners who think, oh, the plant is done. The flower has finished blooming, and they'll prune back not only the flower stalk, but the leaves as well. Don't do that. Those leaves need to keep growing so that through photosynthesis, they can put energy into that bulb or that corm or that rhizome so that you get flowers next year. If you prune those type of plants too soon while the leaves are still growing, then you might not get flowers next year. So this is one of those things about flowering plants in the spring, is the pruning is really important. If you prune too soon, like with the bulbs, you might not have flowers the next year. If you prune too late, like with the lilacs, you might not get flowers next year. So if you've seen that with your spring flowering plants, that the following year you didn't get blooms, think about what you did the year before and how you cut back that plant, and that might give you the answer that you didn't know you needed. So I'm going to wait a little bit for my lilacs. It's nice to see them in bloom right now, and I'm putting in more plants all the time that I have to learn more about because of the concerns that we have about pruning. So, okay, let's see what else we have popping up here. Keep those questions coming. Frank is saying, my early potatoes are doing great. Bottom leaves beginning to yellow. They've never flowered. Can they be ready in a few weeks if they don't flower? They're a 90-day variety. Yeah, they could be. That's one of those things. Typically, when we're growing potatoes, the rule of thumb is that we let them flower, and then the leaves start to die back, and that's when we harvest them. But early potatoes, because they're so quick, they might not have reached that point. The temperatures may not actually have increased to where they're going to start sending up their flowers. And so I would suggest go ahead and dig down by one of your plants, see how big the potatoes are right now. If they're big enough for you, like if it's a smaller fingerling size potato and they're ready to harvest, yeah, you don't need to wait for the flower stalk. You can go ahead and harvest now. Or you can allow it to continue to grow, because as long as the plant is green and growing, those tubers will continue to get bigger. Once it all yellows or all turns brown, you're not going to get any increased growth of those tubers, and that's why it's time to harvest at that point. But experiment a little bit, Frank. Get down there and see what's actually happening in the soil. It might be time to go ahead and get some of those early potatoes out of the ground, and let me know how it turns out. I think that's great. Okay, let's see what else we have. And you guys are talking back and forth about some good channels. Garden Answer. She actually has a couple different channels, which I think is great. Lots of good information. Rusted Gardens got some good stuff out there. So glad to see you guys talking back and forth. 1870s Homestead has also got some good videos. Lots of stuff out there. And I think I've mentioned this before. Whenever I come across a gardening channel, I'd actually like to see what their videos are about. I have a long list of gardening channels on a spreadsheet that I put together, and I'll track the channels I like. I think many of us tend to like the same channels, because what you'll find is the channels that are most successful really strike a chord with most gardeners. Now, there are a lot of specialized channels and with lots of good information, but you can find good information all over the place. You know, most of you probably watch Mark with Self-Sufficient Me out of Australia, and there's a lot that he grows that I can't grow, but very knowledgeable, and his gardens look great, and it's fun to watch those channels. There's also a lot of good stuff that's coming out of California. And so Epic Gardening is another great channel. A lot of you, I think, probably watch down in the San Diego area. Garden Answer, she's up in, I think is it Idaho? And so I'm in Colorado. You've got people just all over the place. Roots and Refuge Farm. I think they're moving, they're now in Tennessee. And so the wonderful thing about it is you can find a lot of good channels all over the world that give you great information. You know, I'm a buddy with Tony on Simplified Gardening in the UK, and he's got great information as well. And so those are some of the channels that I watch on a regular basis. And so I'm watching Australia, United Kingdom, Idaho, San Diego, and Texas. When you put all that together, it's a pretty broad range of climates and environments, but I learn stuff all the time, or at least make sure that I substantiate some of the thoughts that I have as to how I'm doing it. There's lots of reasons for watching videos, so I'm glad you guys are sharing some of that back and forth. And Callie Kim is another good one. She actually has a live stream that comes on a little bit after this one. And so occasionally I'll check out Callie Kim as well. A focus on warmer conditions. She can grow an awful lot in her California garden that I certainly can't. But she's been doing this longer than I have. So also Western Oregon is what Heidi says for Garden Answer. So I knew it was somewhere in that Idaho, Oregon area. So thank you for pointing that out. And Nicole, there are some good channels in the Pacific Northwest, and I know there's some people on here that can point that out for you. None come to my mind right off the top of my head, but I know there's some good Pacific Northwest, so I appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Kay Russell, of course, Gardener Scott has been super helpful. Found him first, and of course, because we share Zones 5B. And so if you're new to the live stream, because I get this question occasionally, I don't say it every week, but I am in Colorado and I am in a Zone 5B garden. And it is nice when you can find someone that matches your particular climate and the type of growing. But like I just mentioned, there's stuff to learn from gardeners all over the world, which is why this is so great that we have this global community on our Monday live chats that we can share this information back and forth. Joy of Garden channel just started and has a few videos. I checked out Joy of Garden a little bit earlier today, and so there's lots of good stuff. Roots and Refuge is in Arkansas. Moved to South Carolina. Okay, I was thinking it was Tennessee that they were moving to, so it's South Carolina that they're moving to. So get out there, just keep watching the videos. When you find a video that resonates with you and you choose to subscribe, keep doing it, but keep looking, keep finding other channels out there, because our tastes change. I appreciate all of you, but I know that there are gardeners out there that have outgrown Gardener Scott. They might have been a brand new gardener and I was able to get them started, but maybe they live in California and they realize that they can learn more now that they're a little more experienced from a channel that's in California. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I hate to see you leave the Gardener Scott community at some point, but I know you'll come back. I'll keep making videos, and I'll make a video that you'll find years from now if you find a new favorite. But either way, you don't have to just be a Gardener Scott fan. You can be a fan of all these other channels, because we have a lot to share. And I'm just glad to be part of your group, part of your gardening information, part of this larger community of some of these other channels that are really doing well. Today, actually, I should hit 225,000 subscribers. In fact, it might have already happened. If you haven't subscribed yet, and if you're looking at the number and it hasn't hit 225,000 yet, go ahead and subscribe. You may end up being the 225,000th subscriber to the Gardener Scott channel. It's just been so nice, all the support that you all are giving as this channel grows, because it really does help motivate me to continue to make videos and to continue to try to get a lot of the new gardeners motivated and enthusiastic about gardening, and all of you more experienced gardeners to keep you going and to not give up. That's why I do this. So it's awesome. Okay, let's see what else we have popping up before we get to the point in our show where we share some philosophy time. Let's see. Oh yeah, Mahani is saying next level gardening. I'll watch. I don't know my family garden as well. I'll have to check that out a little bit. I like to be in the know of what these other people are doing. And like Ann J says, I've subscribed to a lot of gardening channels and learned from each and every one. The way YouTube works is when you subscribe to a channel, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see when they have new videos come out. If you click on the bell, you're more likely to see all the videos. But even when you authorize YouTube to send you a video on a channel that you subscribe to, there's no guarantee that you'll see all of those videos either. And so by subscribing to multiple channels, you're more likely to be exposed to the videos that you've shown an interest in, because that's what YouTube does. It feeds you the videos that you have shown a likelihood of watching. And so that's why my lilac video is doing so well right now. It's that time of year that people are looking to prune lilacs, and so they come across my video. But I get almost no views of my how to prune lilac video in December, because very few people are pruning lilacs in December. And that's the way YouTube works, is they know, they think they know what you're looking for, and then they'll feed you the videos based on what you're looking for. So if you subscribe to some of the bigger channels, those of us that really have some good content, you may not see everything we produce, but when you get on YouTube, you're more likely to see one of our videos than somebody you're not subscribing to. That's just basically how it works. And so when you do come across channels you like, subscribing is a good idea, because it does make it more likely that YouTube will offer up one of those future videos for you. And I get comments like that all the time, where someone will see a video of mine and they'll say, "Where have you been? I haven't seen any of your videos for 6 months." Well, I'm releasing 2 to 3 videos every single week. And so if you haven't seen one of my videos in 6 months, it might just be that we're not matched up with what you're searching for and with what videos I'm producing, which is another reason to click on the bell, so that you're more likely to see what I'm producing on a weekly basis. But it's totally up to you. Totally up to you as to which videos you choose and whether you want to become a subscriber or not. Totally up to you. So just be aware that there's a lot of good information out there, and I do encourage that you seek out as much information as possible, and because it actually benefits me. I'm here sitting in front of a nice backdrop telling you about these different ways to garden and giving answers to your questions. You might have doubts about what I suggest. Well, if you watch another video, chances are their information is going to match my information. I'm pretty confident about that. And so that's why it benefits me. If you watch one of my videos and go, "Nah, that wouldn't work," and then you see Epic Gardening doing a video with a similar topic saying something similar, well, now that validates what I said in the first place, which means that you're more likely to pay attention the next time that we have a live stream or a video. So that's why I say get out there and see what else is happening, because most of us that are at this point where we've got hundreds of thousands of subscribers, we're all saying pretty much the same thing. We have some very similar methods in the way we garden and a lot of the same guidance. And that just helps all of us do that much better. And it helps you become a better gardener as well, because you're getting that reliable information from multiple sources. So that's kind of how I approach it. And that's why I tend to watch the same channels that you're watching, because it is good information. Yeah, and Jay says, ebb and flow out of many, many gardening channels. And I do the same thing. There are just a few, excuse me, there are just a few that I try to watch pretty much every week. They have something out. James Prigioni is another great channel. I'll watch pretty much everything that James produces on a weekly basis, just because I like the presentation, I like the information, and much of it is validation. You know, all of us gardeners, and you probably fall into this category as well, you know what you're doing, but you have doubts as to whether it's going to be successful. And so even though we may have done something 100 times, we still have doubts. And so it's so nice when we see somebody else talking about or demonstrating something that we do on a regular basis. It just helps validate the way we're doing it and how we garden. So that's why ebbing and flowing can be a good thing. Yeah, and Kevin says he likes Tuck. James and Tuck as a team is pretty good. I was just talking with my neighbor yesterday about Tuck, and at some point I'll be filming Lily. Lily isn't in my garden much, but I've got a video planned, a couple of videos later in the week that Lily may or may not show up in. And so Lily isn't a full-time garden dog, but at some point Lily's aging and won't be with us hopefully as long as possible, but in a few years maybe not. But I am planning to get a younger pup and train that pup for the garden, and it won't be like James and Tuck, but in my future videos I do hope to have a garden sidekick, and so we'll see what happens with that in the years ahead. So let's go ahead and talk about I kind of alluded to it earlier with the weather extremes that we've been having, and this last week in the United States really was craziness. And so a week ago when I was doing the live stream, our temperatures were close to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And tomorrow, our temperatures are supposed to be above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and for the rest of the week. And so that's a shift of from 10 degrees Celsius to 33 degrees Celsius in a week. And that was my springtime. I've been measuring the soil temperature, and a week ago, my soil temperature was 55 degrees. And so I've been hardening off my plants. My peppers have been in pots for weeks, waiting to go in the ground. I am 3 weeks after my last frost date, and I want to get these plants in the ground. But at 55 degrees soil temperature, that's just too cool for me to put the peppers in. And that's what it was a week ago. This last week was pretty nice. We had some good weather. We had some rain and some thunderstorms. And now all of a sudden, summer is here. And I essentially had no springtime. We had no gradual time for the weather to warm, for the soil to warm, for plants to grow. I told you about that severe freeze I had that killed a lot of those young seedlings that I started before my last frost date. This has just been craziness in my garden. And I know many of you are encountering the same kind of conditions, where it's hot and it's cold and it's hot and it's cold, and you start hardening off, but then you have to stop hardening off, and then you put the plants out because you just want to get the plants out, but then cold hits and you lose some of your plants. Well, this was one of those weeks as I look forward where I just stopped and rested and sat out in the garden on a nice warm day, because I did get some tomato plants in the ground, and I just said, man, gardening is crazy. You just never know what's going to happen. My weather is so extreme, and when I watch the news and I see what's happening in other places of the world, it's so extreme. Why would anybody do this? And so I decided to just embrace the craziness. I know that plants are going to die. I know I'm not going to be able to follow my plan like I hope to. But so what? I'm outside, I'm putting plants in the ground. I've already harvested some spinach and some of my mesclun lettuce mix. It's starting to happen. The radishes will be ready to harvest here in a little bit. I've got tomatoes in the ground. I've got about 400 square foot hail cloth that's going to go over my garden this week. It's crazy. And so I know hail is coming. I bought this hail cloth a couple months ago. It finally arrived. I ordered the anchors and the bolts for this new garden area so I can put the hail cloth up on Thursday and Friday of this week. Yesterday, there wasn't a thunderstorm forecast. It was supposed to be overcast and it started to drizzle. And I have all of my trays of plants laid out, my peppers and eggplants. And I was looking at the sky and thinking, oh, should I leave these plants out and let this little drizzle go ahead and water them? And then it started hailing, like big hail, hard hail. So I opened up my door and I was running out and I was grabbing the trays and I was bringing them indoors and the hail is bouncing into the house. And I finally got all of those trays that I was hardening off into the house. And it was like, where did this hail come from? It's supposed to wait another week so I can get my hail cloth up. But it's just crazy. Oh well. I'm embracing the craziness. It's all part of the experience. It's a story I can tell you. It's a story I can put in a video at some point. It's a story I can put in my garden journal. It's just craziness. It may never repeat again. But as I look to next year and start thinking about when I'll put my hail cloth up, I'll plan a week or two earlier to just try to deal with the craziness of my particular weather patterns. And when we talk about insects, when we talk about pets, when we talk about pests, when we talk about all these other things that go on in our garden, it's craziness. You never know what's going to happen. And I think that's one of those things that just kind of helps make all of this exciting, which is why I say embrace the craziness. Don't let it get you down. Don't let it discourage you. If I hadn't have been home and I came home after that hail that I had yesterday, I would have probably discovered all those little seedlings that aren't in the ground yet would have been pummeled pretty good. When I checked my tomato plants this morning, the ones that I put out last week, I had damage on some of those tomato plants. On 3 of the plants, I've got 14 plants that are out right now. On 8 of the plants, I covered them with plastic, anticipating that I was going to put hail cloth and shade cloth later on. But the ones that are out in the open, 3 of them had the growing tip broken off by hail yesterday. That's crazy. These plants haven't even started growing yet, and I've already lost the growing tips. Luckily, I've noticed that there's some suckers lower down, and I hopefully will have those suckers able to take over and continue growing for the plant. But I may have to pull the plant out and put something else in that spot. It's crazy. The best laid plans of mice and men. And so don't let it worry you too much. Stick with the gardening. You lose plants. The weather just makes you crazy. But ultimately, we all get outside. We all have our plants. We all learn something. We all get together on Mondays to discuss our gardening. And we all have stories to share at the end because of all this craziness that continues to happen all around us in the garden. So just wanted to share that with you today because I guarantee you this is not going to be the last of the craziness, especially when you have a garden in Colorado and especially when the temperatures this next week are going to be close to record high temperatures like many of you might be experiencing right now. You just have to adjust and deal with it and move forward and do what you can to get the satisfaction out of gardening, to get what it is that you're seeking in the first place. And if you can do that, then you'll be back. Then you'll truly be a gardener because next year you know the craziness is going to continue, but you are crazy in wanting to continue to find out what new craziness is going to pop up. So there you have it. That's been on my thoughts these last couple days because it's so easy at this point to just say, oh, why am I even making this effort? And I love it. I think it's well worth the effort. I wanted to build some structures and new areas of the garden, and then the price of lumber is 3, 4, 5 times what it was. And so, oh well, that's just craziness. the economy has affected my gardening plans. Well, I'll get to it eventually when prices fall back down. I can deal with the craziness. I'm embracing it as just something that's helping me on my journey so that when I finally do get to that point that I can harvest or sit under the hailcloth or whatever it be, I know that the results are well worth all of my effort because I learned something along the way, and that harvest will definitely taste better when I had to work for it as opposed to something that's just so easy you don't even think twice about it. So I hope that helps you as you move forward in this week of craziness, of especially the weather craziness and everything associated with it. Hang in there, keep gardening, keep doing all the stuff you're doing, and I hope to see you back here next Monday for more gardening talk, more questions, more answers, more camaraderie, and more opportunity for all of us just to get together and hang out before we go outside and do some more gardening. So hope you have a great gardening week. I'm headed outside here in just a little bit to try to do what I can do as well. So thanks for being here. Thanks for all of your support. And I'll see you back here same time, same place next Monday. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.